Hi everyone, so my name is Aaliyah Combs and I'm also presenting with Ella Kessler on The Return of a Man Called Horse. The Return of a Man Called Horse was shot in 1975 as an American Mexican Western film directed by Ivan Gescher and written by Dorothy M. Johnson and Jack Dewitt. The film was released August 4th, 1976, after mostly being filmed in South Dakota with some scenes filmed in the United Kingdom and Mexico. And the story is about trappers in 1840s that retreat from the government who is backing the Yellow Hands off of their sacred land. They're waiting for the supernatural war to descend on the people that took over the land. While in England, Lord John Morgan feels his spirit weaken, so he returns to America to live with the Yellow Hands again. He tries to get them to follow him to take back the land and work together. Ivan Kushner, the director, began his career in 1950 producing documentaries for the United States Information Service in the Middle East. He later directed and photographed Confidential File and got his first break by the producer Roger Corman. He is also known for Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, since George Lucas was a huge fan of the movie. One of the writers of The Return of a Man Called Horse began her career in 1950 and worked as a writer and editor of women's magazines in New York. Jack, the other writer, worked on multiple films, including King of Africa, Jack of Diamonds, just to name a few. Some of the main cast are Richard Harris, who played John Morgan, Gail Sondergaard, who was the Elk Woman, Jeffrey Lewis as Zemus, and Tom Grace. Some reviews on the movie was on Rotten Tomatoes, and one that particularly stood out to me was on Movie Reviews by Robert Marshall, stating the film had a grittier, edgier look to it compared to the original. Colors are muted, with a plate of dabbed browns and reds compared to the vibrant greens and deep blue in A Man Called Horse. Not sure if it was intentional or just a byproduct of filming locations. To boil the plot down, the premise is white man gets bored of the European life and gets to visit the Red Brethren, only to find that they lost their spirit and wildness. The Return of a Man Called Horse budget was estimated at $4 million, and the box office return was $1,382,000 after being released for a month, according to Film Talk. According to Office Box Mojo, each ticket in 1975 was $2.05, which means 2,791,000 people must have seen the movie in theaters.
Hi everyone, my name is Elise or Ella Kessler, and today I will be working with Aaliyah Combs to further explore our movie this week, which is called The Return of a Man Called Horse, and I will be going through the contextualization of the film. Before I do begin to do that, this movie is a sequel, and I actually want to go quickly through the very beginning movie because I don't think that you can really understand the message or the theme of this movie without obviously understanding what happens in the first movie, because that's also very important when it comes to our theme. So it's not too much. They actually tell you in the very beginning of the film what has happened so that you're all caught up, and this is really all that you need to know. In 1821, English aristocrat Lord John Morgan, while on a hunting expedition in the Dakota Territory of the American wilderness, was captured and enslaved by the Yellow Hands, a branch of the Sioux Nation. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. He was given the name Shunkawakan, again, I hope I'm not butchering that, which means horse. He showed such bravery in battle that he was freed and adopted as a member of the tribe. For 5 years, the Man Called Horse lived as a Yellow Hand and found fulfillment in their tribal and spiritual life. So, to understand the film's theme, we need to understand what was happening during the time the film was released. So, the film was released in 1976, and we can really compare the time of the 70s to the 60s, the time period that we actually just learned about. Because really it's a continuation of what happened in the 60s. It's a time where we are fighting for equality and civil rights. We are just now ending the Vietnam War a year previously. So many anti-war movements are still occurring. So to our right, we can see a protest for the Vietnam War, and to the bottom left, we see American troops fighting in the Vietnam War. And then, as well as, we are also in a time where people are struggling to trust the government because of Nixon and the Watergate scandal happening in 1972. You can see at the bottom right the paper headline for when Nixon resigns because of Watergate. So this is really a time that the American people are struggling to trust their government, and the American government isn't necessarily being shown in a positive light. Moving on, we have the Native Americans fighting for their rights. And as Aaliyah explained, this is a film that's telling a story about the American government stealing land from the Native Americans, or doing horrendous things like murdering and kidnapping them. And so it's important that we zoom in closer to what is happening with the Native Americans during the time in 1976 as well. So, along with other minorities such as African Americans and women, Native Americans too were fighting for equality. According to an article on the Native American Power Movement on Digital History, throughout the 1960s, American Indians were the nation's poorest minority group, more deprived than any other group, according to virtually every socioeconomic measure. In 1970, the Indian unemployment rate was 10 times the national average, and 40% of the Native American population lived below the poverty line. In that year, Native American life expectancy was just 44 years, a third less than that of the average American. So, in response to this, the American Indian movement is established in 1963, and they begin to fight back. They begin fighting against racism, poverty, treaty rights for tribal land, and building schools. And because of this fight, we do see a couple things happen. We see the Wounded Knee incident, which is to not be confused with the massacre, but this happened in 1973 and was a protest where about 200 Oglala Lokata, I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong as well, and AIM followers seized and occupied Wounded Knee, South Dakota, in order to protest President Richard Wilson and the U.S. government not fulfilling treaties with the Native Americans. So also that's pretty interesting that this happened in South Dakota, as well as the filming of the film happened in South Dakota. So I think that says a lot of things as well. And so in response to this, there are some victories to be made. In 1980, the federal government agrees to pay millions of dollars to different tribes, and we also have court decisions permitting tribal authorities to sell cigarettes, run gambling casinos, and levy taxes, which is very helpful towards them, but definitely not. The fight isn't over yet whatsoever. So, how did the film reflect the circumstances of society when it was made? Given now that we know about the historical relevance of the film, we can really now understand just exactly what it was touching on. So I believe that it was touching on mistrust in government. We have the government being the villain right now. The American government is who we are against in the film. Treatment of Native Americans in not only the past, but during the time the film was made, racism and the fight for equality. And I'd also like to say that I don't believe that this film was just targeting racism towards Native Americans. I think that this film definitely is targeting racism towards all of the minorities. And again, in 1976, racism and equality for all, well, lack of equality for all really still was happening. So I definitely think it's touching on all forms. And we also have the consequences of war. This film was made exactly 1 year after the Vietnam War ended, and we are still seeing portrayed to us the war just being so brutal and violent and people dying and children being murdered. It's not pretty, and I think, again, this is another film that's telling us just how bad war can be and definitely not really glamorizing it in any way. Touching on themes, there's a lot. There's themes that we just previously spoke about, the themes that I think have more importance within the society at the time. There's themes such as racism, equality, and impacts of war. And there's also a lot of other important themes. There's lots of themes that I took from this. I got religion and faith and spirituality. That's very important to the Native Americans in this film, and the struggle that John is having is within his spirituality. He feels like something is missing, and he goes out to find what that is. We have loyalty. I think he's very loyal to his Native American people, and he goes back to help them, and that's really another goal of his is to help these people. Bravery, which is pretty self-explanatory. They are all being brave and trying to fight for their land back. We have finding peace within yourself. Again, that's the main conflict in the very beginning, is John just not feeling right within himself, and something in his soul is really missing. And the next three things I really think all tie in together: doing the right thing, urban versus rural, and appreciation and understanding of other cultures. And this is because after spending some time in England, John comes back to find his tribe has been violently moved from their land, and some of them haven't survived, and they've been through so much, and their land is taken away from them, and he wants to help them, but he brings a lot of new technology to help them, mostly guns, and they don't want to use these guns, and he has a very hard time at first understanding why. They say that they need permission from the spirits before they can use these guns and before they can get their land back, and he's saying, I have the guns, I have what we need to get the land back. Why don't you guys want to have your land and be eating again and survive? And they really basically say they'd rather die than get their land back when they're not supposed to. And a lot of the movie is him trying to understand this other culture and appreciate it, and do the right thing. Just because he doesn't think this is the right thing to do, he has to understand that this is what they think the right thing is to do. And I also say urban versus rural because I think this is a very prominent theme within most films these days, even in 2018, is just the idea of what is better. Is it better to have technology and be in a city, or is it better to have a lack of technology and be in a more calming country area? And I think for a long time, films were trying to get people to lean more on the urban side, rather than the rural side. And this film is actually kind of putting the rural side more in a positive light. So how are these themes conveyed? I didn't actually find this movie to have a lot of storytelling elements. It was fairly straightforward within the story, but I definitely did find some symbols and metaphors. I think that in the end of the day, this movie is about the American government versus minorities, and I think the white trappers stand for the American government, obviously, and the yellow hands stand for the minorities. And there's bison representing freedom, wardrobe representing the opposing sides as well as finding yourself, and of course guns representing technology and war. And moving on, we have the cinematography and lighting. So we have the cooler tones in England and civilization. I thought that this was a pretty cool comparison because we actually see John at church, again being spiritual, and the colors are very cool toned, very blue, and he seems very unhappy. And then moving down to the bottom, we see John again going through a spiritual experience, but with the Native Americans, and instead the colors are far more brighter and vibrant. And I think the coldness in the original kind of stands for his soul and not really having anything left. And then when we get to him being with the Native Americans, it's a lot warmer and vibrant, and his soul is passionately restored. So these are Aaliyah's sources, and then these are my sources. So that concludes everything that I have to say about this film. Thanks, guys.